My name's Donald Mark Haynes. I only go by Mark. I have a degree in biology. That's why I became a software engineer. And I retired and I started doing a lot of different types of panels, mostly on the history of technology, but I started doing them on the Fermi Paradox. The first one I ran was on the Solarian hypothesis and then the rare earth hypothesis. And then I was at the previous session in Montreal because Stephen Webb was there and I read his book and I said, well, this is really cool. So the day that he was keynote speaker, of course I get up late and I caught the last 5 minutes of it. So this is about the Fermi Paradox, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to let everybody explain who they are and whatever interest they might have in these things. Okay, hold on.
Hi, I'm Justin Feng. I guess I'm a last-minute switch out. So I do physics. In particular, I work in general relativity. I got my degree here at UT Austin, and I currently work as a postdoc in the Czech Academy of Sciences. And I suppose I'll be giving a talk tomorrow on topics related to the Fermi Paradox.
Hi, I'm Ken Wisian. You've heard from me before. I'm a geophysicist here at the university, also a retired Air Force general, so that comes into play on some of my perspective. I work a little bit in SETI and space exploration, some of the international politics aspects of it, as well as energy research and such. And I teach a course for freshmen here called Life in the Universe, where we spend a good chunk of the semester exploring the Fermi Paradox.
I'm Andrew Higgins. I'm a professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering at McGill University in Montreal. I've been an enthusiast for interstellar travel for a long, long time, since about 1986 when I read Robert L. Forward's Flight of the Dragonfly. It took me 30 years to get tenured and become a full professor, but finally about 10 years ago I decided to pivot my entire research effort at my university towards interstellar travel. I now teach a course. As far as I know, it's the only university course in the world taught on the topic exclusively on interstellar propulsion. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
Okay, so I know most of you know what this is, but basically the Fermi Paradox is the discrepancy between the lack of conclusive evidence of an advanced intelligent civilization and the high likelihood that they exist. And so he postulated this almost as a throwaway a number of years ago. Now, what I find interesting is I hang out in this little cigar lounge in Plymouth, Michigan, and most of these guys are like local businessmen, and they're also tradesmen. And so I'll talk about this. They don't know who Fermi is, but they all have an opinion about these things. So this is a topic I think that that has a lot of interest in it. So the way this is going to work is we're going to ask a series of questions, and the panel will respond to them. Okay. Let's talk about the first one, the dark forest. Now, the dark forest postulates that ETCs purposely stay dark to prevent other ETCs from destroying them as a threat. Question, is this a valid hypothesis?
Well, perfect. As a matter of fact, I will be making a few comments about this tomorrow, so don't miss that talk. I guess the big weakness in the dark forest hypothesis is really in identifying a proper motive for this postulate. Why would they want to stay silent? And this is, I think I did see some pushback on the dark forest hypothesis for this particular reason, that there isn't really any clear reason why these civilizations will want to stay quiet. And in the talk that I'll be delivering tomorrow, I will attempt to provide a very strong reason why extraterrestrial intelligences would prefer to stay quiet rather than to advertise their presence.
Yeah, this is one that I look at from kind of a risk management point of view. Everything we see from our one known case of life in the universe says it's a life form, eat life form universe. That life is infinitely competitive for all practical purposes. So with that one little factoid, and understanding the destructive power that comes with being an interstellar capable civilization, we can go into that later. Now throw in also, well, what does that mean? Well, that means that another species, an intelligent species, has the potential to be able to wipe you out. So if you're coming at it from a risk management point of view, that's an existential risk, and even if it's very low probability, you have to take it seriously. And so that then gets into something we probably won't get into here, but the METI versus SETI argument, do you message people or not? I've come down firmly on the side of, hey, let's stay quiet until we have a better situational awareness on the issue.
I don't believe it's a valid hypothesis because we've already violated it. So we are right now sending signals out into the galaxy. There's a very nice paper that was published last year by a number of respected SETI authors. Jason Wright is one of the authors on it. They go through and do a very detailed calculation of how detectable are we as a civilization right now. Their calculation is if there's an Arecibo telescope, 1960s level radio telescope at Alpha Centauri, they would be able to detect our passive signals that we're leaking out. And if you want to intentionally signal, an Arecibo can communicate with another Arecibo on the other side of the galaxy. So we have this ability since the 1950s or 60s. So if there's a malevolence out there that's extinguishing life, get ready, they're on their way because they're already watching our I Love Lucy reruns right now.
Only out to a very small bubble portion of the galaxy. And that's a difference between whether we are or whether we should. So y'all might want to ask follow-up questions on this. This might get fun.
Generally, the format we agreed upon was we'll wait until the end to do follow-up. Normally, I would just open it up for audience participation. Let's do the next one. Okay, so let's discuss the great filters. If one term in the Drake equation is close to zero, how would this impact various types of filters, such as the formation of rocky planets which permit liquid water and a temperate climate, or the formation of simple or complex life forms?
I guess this is a little bit beyond my area of expertise, so I suppose I will give this one to Ken.
Well, is your question, what do we think of great filters? What's our favorite one? Are you specifically focused on climate as a great filter, or can you elaborate?
Yeah, I don't have the formula up here, but you're all familiar with the Drake equation, right? And there's a series of variables and they're basically set to some value, that the formation of stars, the formation and the Goldilocks zone, and these type of things. If you set one of these criteria close to zero, how does this impact? How does this impact the development of advanced intelligent civilizations? If you set the Drake equation to close to zero, that rocky planets actually don't form, we know it does, but that they don't form, or that there's that which permit liquid water in some kind of temperate climate zone, how would this impact ETs as we see them?
So I guess my main comment would be that, at least from my background, I don't see any fundamental physics reason why you wouldn't see a factor that is set to zero. But of course, they're at least coming from the fundamental physics side, and so I will not comment on this any further.
Okay, well, specifically addressing, for instance, having a suitable planet for life to evolve on. You know, the Earth might very well have been very lucky. I could see that being a reasonable great filter. Reasons why, well, as we heard earlier today, we've already gone through pretty wild climate shifts, including snowball Earth at time. And we are warming. Natural warming would be vastly slower than human-induced warming in the climate. But the sun heats up as it ages. That's part of a star on the main sequence. It's roughly 30% hotter now than it used to be when the planet first formed. So that habitable zone around a star moves outward during the star's lifetime. So you have to have a planet that has all the right conditions to begin with, but has to be in the right orbit to where it stays in that habitable zone, in our case, 4.5 billion years for intelligent life to evolve. Planets like Venus may have started in the habitable zone, but they've gone out. So yeah, that's definitely something that could be a factor. We don't have a good grasp on that right now, but that's definitely one of the possibilities.
Okay, yeah, I mean, any discussion of the Fermi Paradox brings us right away to the Drake equation. I'd like to start out by repeating the comment that Drake himself made, which is most equations in science is how we organize our knowledge. The Drake equation is how we organize our ignorance. The first three terms we've pretty well nailed down now. So the first three terms are formation of stars, if I recall, number of stars that have planets, how many planets around each star. So we're getting really good ground truth on that data now. The fourth term has to do with formation of life, and it's not my field, but I try to keep up, and wow, this is a field that's making a lot of progress. So 30 years ago, you know, astrobiology, these things were kind of a joke. How do you have a science with n equals 1 data points on it? But now really some really excellent work is being done in origins of life, and you know, papers in Nature and Science, Nobel laureates. I just read an excellent book I'd recommend called Is Earth Exceptional by Jack Szostak, who's a Nobel Prize winner and McGill University alumna in RNA, and an astrophysicist from the Hubble Space Institute, Mario Livio, and it's a discussion between, you know, an expert on astrophysics and an expert on RNA world, and wow, this is, you know, I'm not an informed opinion, but they talk a good game about how much we know now about the origins of life on Earth. But as we get to the last few terms in the Drake equation, I think those terms tell you more about the person answering the question than it does about life in the universe, especially the last term in the Drake equation, L, which is the longevity of a civilization. And that is something, when someone tells you their estimate for that value, you know, to me they're telling you about their worldview, their politics, they're telling you nothing about what we know about the universe. So that last term, whether civilizations last 100 years or 1 billion years, you know, it's anybody's guess. So that is really what I mean by it's just quantifying our ignorance, and it's a Rorschach test. Okay, it's like the ink blot that you look at and you interpret, and it doesn't tell you anything about the ink blot. It just tells you about the person interpreting it.
One thing to add, though, a lot of these potential existential risks that could affect L would be greatly mitigated if we did become an interstellar species.
So here's another sort of what-if question. If we are all alone, what are humanity's obligations as a steward of the galaxy as we explore pristine and untouched worlds or encounter less advanced intelligent life forms?
I guess this is more of a moral question or a question of taste. Of course, I would say the default answer is that perhaps we should do our best to respect what is already there. But at the same time, we also have a need to survive, and of course, our our own star is only going to be well, our own Earth will only be able to support life for, I believe, on the order of 1 billion years before the sun becomes too hot for the Earth to maintain life. And so, at some point, we do have to move out. But at the same time, I think it is appropriate, at the very least, to have a good respect for what is already there, and especially if there are other forms of life out there.
Yeah, I think that's well summarized. It's one of those things where, yeah, I think pretty much most people would come down and side of, yeah, there ought to be something like a prime directive, as was mentioned earlier. But there might be limits to that. You know, would we risk our own existence for some microbe? I don't know. But this then ties back to some of those earlier terms that are in the Drake equation, for instance. Like, if it turns out that microbial life is easy and is really widespread through the universe, then do we not settle anywhere, or do we anyway? So there's interesting feedback loops on some of these things.
Okay, first of all, the question on the title slide was, are we alone? And I want to answer that one first. Let's go find out. That's the first answer. And then after we found out, then I'll leave it to the ethics experts to argue what we should do next. But let's just answer the question first.
Agreed.
Well, I tell friends and family that my funeral arrangements, I want to be buried on Mars intact, because I want the bacteria in my gut to contaminate an entire planet. I want to be my genetic material to terraform Mars. But the question basically is, do we have a stewardship relationship to these other worlds? If there's no intelligent life there, you know, and it's microbial bacteria, or that there's a simple ecosystems, do we have an obligation to preserve it? Or is this okay, since there's no advanced intelligent life there, we can terraform it, you know, to turn it into our own purposes?
Well, just quickly following up on the theme there, there's no right or wrong answer. I think, yeah, there's probably other intelligent life. Is it near enough to make a difference? I don't know. But I'll flip your question around, and that is, I hope that if there's more intelligent life out there, they'll be really kind and respectful of our existence.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit here. Let's think about the anthropomorphic principle. Would ETCs have the same motivations as humans to develop advanced technology, leave their village, their planet, and explore other solar systems? So is this principle still valid?
So this is a question that I have thought about a bit in the work that I did recently, and I guess this ties in a bit into Michael Nyack's talk earlier in this symposium, and it has to do with I guess the question of synthetic biology. And of course, if we develop the ability to engineer our own biology, then of course we will begin to change our own biology to perhaps I guess reduce our sensitivity to pain, extend our lifespans, and at a certain point, the question arises: will the result even be considered human by any definition? And so that is I guess one possible outcome of synthetic biology. And of course, if you assume that we continue to develop our ability to modify our own biology, then of course the thing that results may very well look look extremely different than humans today. That said, this is something that I would also I would also counter and this is perhaps a very subjective view of things. I would say that a lot of the things that we would like to fix in our own biology, our pain, our finite lifespans, our vulnerabilities, I would say that these are partly the things that drive us to explore and to do the things that we do. And perhaps if we remove that, we may eventually reach a point where we are happy with ourselves and we will no longer have the desire to explore or expand. And so perhaps that might, in a sense, be a great filter of sorts.
The anthropomorphic principle is, almost by definition, you shouldn't apply it, but you can try to really generalize to basic life. Again, we're limited by our one data set, but all life has an innate desire to survive and reproduce in some degree. So can you build from there all the way up to a civilization that would explore the galaxy? I don't know. I think if you've got technology, it becomes quite likely. But at the same time, as was just mentioned, I think there's some interesting things happening to us right now. So for instance, the population of the Earth is probably going to peak this century and then start a long, slow decline. What will that do to our motivation to explore and expand? You know, you still have an ultimate limit of somewhere between 100, 200 million years and a billion years before we'd be cooked off this planet, unless we do massive engineering, which is already being contemplated, as we heard. So, does that motivation extend? To some extent, I might phrase it as, does that matter? If it's a intelligent civilization, but they've never really looked at going off their planet, it's going to be a lot harder to find them, a lot less likely that we'd ever encounter them. So maybe it becomes a second order issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of these Rorschach questions. Is all life going to have an imperative to explore and reach out? I don't know. But I think Justin said something that resonated with me. What happens when you become just really, really happy with yourself? Do you lose the desire to explore? And that's been, my own private answer to the Fermi Paradox for a long time has been, who needs a starship when you have a holodeck? Okay, when you can just invent worlds that you can explore and design to titillate and satiate your own desires. Do you really want to do the heavy lifting of doing real exploration or not? And I think with what's happened with generative AI, and people are finding themselves addicted to this intelligence that now are, I don't know if it's intelligent yet, but there's something that's in all of our devices now, and a lot of people are finding that it's just more enjoyable to interact with that than it is with real human beings and in reality. So I think this question, I thought we'd put it off to the 23rd century, but it might be with us much sooner.
No, a little bit more to add to that. I completely agree with that. It's a definite possibility. But even look back at our own history. Multiple civilizations have basically withdrawn for other reasons, ideological reasons and such. So we see it even in us that could happen.
2 points there. The first one, in Stephen Webb's book, by the way, I recommend you get it. There's like 64 different scenarios, and one of them...
75, yeah.
I use that in my course. It's one of my texts.
This is the problem I have with academics. They're always correcting you. Do you know how hard it is to have dinner with my sister? It's like she's always correcting me. Yes, some number. where was I? Oh, one of the scenarios is that if this race has a virtual reality and it's so good, there's no reason to leave because everything you need to explore and everything you need to do is right there. Why would you bother? And there was another point that you, what was the point that you made? Oh no, there was 2 points there.
One is, it's a Rorschach test. Is there an imperative to life is a question that probably tells you a lot about that person's, how they answer that question tells you a lot about that person. And then the second one is who needs a starship when you have a holodeck?
Yeah, okay, so I remember what I was going to say. There's this, in terms of our history, the Chinese had massed this massive sailing ship under an admiral, I forgot his name, and they eventually rounded the Cape of Africa. And then for some apparent reason, they just decided, no, everything that we need to do can be done in mainland China, and that's it. Civilizations can just decide not to do these things anymore. We could decide that everything we need is right here. We do not need to go into the solar system. It's a dangerous place. We take massive risks. Magellan didn't exactly make it home. So yeah, there may be reasons why. They're happy where they are.
There's also an issue of individual action versus collective. If you're perfectly happy in your virtual reality world, and most people are, can society take action even if they know there's a problem coming? How good are we at that now when we can see problems but we can't really get organized to take long-term action? We've got 100 or 200 million years to figure that one out.
Okay, so here's kind of more of a speculative one. Is communication even possible? If this is non-carbon-based life, I mean, their chemistry and their biochemistry has to be incredibly different than ours. Or possibly they exist in some other form that is a little bit, is very alien to us, such as intelligent microbes. We know that microbes actually communicate with each other. Would we even know they exist? And is communication actually possible?
So I would say that communication is possible in the sense that if you want to transmit some information, it is certainly possible. I mean, if some civilization or some life form is producing a signal that we can detect, then in some sense they are communicating with us. Now, whether we can understand what they are trying to convey to us is an entirely different question. And of course, I would say that perhaps the things that we are seeing or the signals that we are detecting, they might already be communicating with us, but we may not recognize them. We may not recognize the signals as communication as such because perhaps the timescales are extremely long, and perhaps maybe the timescales on which they are communicating with us are so long that we don't recognize it as a proper signal. So, but I would say that communication is certainly possible.
Yeah, I think recognizing another intelligence probably likely, especially a technological intelligence. Technosignatures will be there no matter what. Communication that's a tough problem, and none of us are linguists up here. But I know I come back frequently, you hear, well, we'll be able to communicate with mathematics. I haven't seen anything yet that shows me how to cross the gap from communicating mathematical ideas to emotions or abstract concepts. So it can be tough. Now, we still can't decipher some languages here on Earth that have a common species heritage. On the other hand, then the converse to that is, but if you've got an active intelligence trying to communicate with you, that ought to make up for an awful lot. I think it's an interesting problem, and this is one of many areas where I look to researchers in artificial intelligence to do what I call blank slate projects. Start an AI off in as clean a universe as you can, let them evolve, and see what comes out of that, whether it's, you know, an aggressive nature, how they might communicate, anything like that.
Ooh, okay, so this is another one of these questions that all it does is, I think, reveal a lot about the person answering it. I mean, one of the caveats that's usually issued is from information theory, we know that the most efficient way to compress a signal, it becomes indistinguishable from black-body radiation. That, by the way, doesn't originate with Edward Snowden, who sometimes it's attributed to. It comes from Claude Shannon. And again, I'm delighted everybody on the panel is familiar with Stephen Webb's book. Where is everybody? 75 Answers to the Fermi Paradox. So I think this book is kind of tragically underrepresented. So I would recommend everybody try to check out a copy of it. While you're here at a university, you can go to the library, connect on Wi-Fi, and probably download it via PDF and not have to buy it. So it's a cheat code for you. And then, yeah, if they do want to communicate, will they try to communicate with us? I think it probably comes down to how disparate our levels are, right? So sometimes I've heard SETI people say, well, if it's a civilization that's vastly advanced from us, they just may not even view it as being worthwhile. I've heard it expressed, how much time do you spend trying to communicate with bacteria? And not much, but I do spend an inordinate amount of time trying to communicate with my cats. So I think it has to do with just how big the gap is, whether it's, you know, worthwhile for them to make the effort. But for sure, they're going to be more advanced than us, right? I think everybody here knows the numbers on this. You know, age of the universe, age of our galaxy, age of our planet. Anybody we're going to contact is going to be either, you know, very, very primitive compared to us, or very, very advanced. You know, they're going to be bacteria or angels, but they're not going to be, you know, slightly advanced or slightly retarded version of us. It's going to be vastly different, just because the time scales of the galaxy.
Just a little bit more on Webb's book. It is an inexpensive paperback. It's available widely. It's in its second edition. It's really time for an update, but if I remember right, I think he said he doesn't have any plans to update it, so that might be a project for some of us in here. There's a lot more than 75 answers.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to, I just wanted to add, well, maybe a question. If the civilizations are communicating with us very slowly, if they are speaking very slowly, would we even recognize that as communication? That's a summary of what I was saying earlier.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'll just throw this out. Ants are incredible engineers. They build very complex structures. They have their communication system is almost all chemical. And the question is, does that make them intelligent? Does evolution, as evolution is acting upon, or they're acting upon, adapting to their environment, is that a type of intelligence or not? We tend to be centric around creatures with backbones, and so we tend not to look at the more squishy things in life. But anyway, to me, these are interesting questions.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Justin was saying. You know, we live in a certain energy regime. We're oxygen breathers. We're not anaerobic, we're aerobic. That gives us a little bit of an energy advantage. Other things do too. But there are situations, so we're looking for life on icy moons. Potentially, yeah, you could have life there. It might be at a very much lower energy state. And therefore, getting back to what you were saying, the whole thought process is communication could be working on a very different time scale. I think that's relatively easy to imagine. It's a little harder for me to wrap my head around, well, could there be a higher energy life form that is on a much faster time clock? Just think of changing the megahertz of your CPU on your computer, slowing it down a few pulses or something like that.
That's very true. I mean, when a cold-blooded animal like a snake is waking up, its processes of relating to information and it's be able to react to it is much, much slower.
So is mine in the morning before coffee.
Coffee is why plants love us. Is SETI the way to go? Let's discuss our current approach to searching for ETC. Is the current approach still valid? Are we, okay, well, I have a series of questions here, but we can deal with them one at a time. Is the current approach to SETI still valid?
So I don't really have a good answer for that question, except I would say that I don't object to continuing to search because we really we don't want to bias our search for new knowledge. So I would say in that sense maybe it is still valid. We should keep looking, and perhaps not bias ourselves one way or another.
I think we're doing pretty good. I mean, we're expanding the methods we're using to search all the time. As our technology improves, as there's more thought into how could things be detected. There's some pretty clever methods being employed right now. So all I would say is more. Give us more. You know, was it William Proxmire or Goldwater that gave the Golden Fleece to NASA SETI? Proxmire. I need to find that guy's grave and go do something. But he killed NASA funding for SETI programs, so now we have to rely on other methods. But, you know, just think about the impact of a successful discovery. There are some potential downsides. I've written on that, but the potential upsides are huge too. So, yeah, we're doing great. Just we need more creative thought and more resources put to it.
I think SETI is pretty healthy. It's, you know, most of the funding is coming from private philanthropic sources, so it's not a lot of taxpayers' money is going into it. They do good science as part of it. They publish. I'm talking to the interstellar travel community here at the symposium. I think we have a lot to learn from them. I mean, this is something that had a pretty high giggle factor 30, 40 years ago, but now is you know, respected. It doesn't rack up as many citations and doesn't guarantee you grant money, but it's a respected field. I think they could be doing more. I'm not aware of really serious searches being done in the optical. I think, you know, there's a few people that are doing kind of backyard, but it you know, that hasn't hit the mainstream yet. I think that's something that probably should be looking at. But it's a healthy field, and I think the, you know, overall question, life in the universe, astrobiology is compared to our community, the interstellar travel community, you know, I think we have a lot to learn from them, how you carve out good science even when you haven't made your big discovery yet.
Yeah, so I wholly agree with Ken's statement. We do need more. And to add to that, I would say that you can't really predict breakthroughs. And the only way that I can think of to maximize the chances of a breakthrough is, well, more. And so we should continue these efforts and perhaps expand them if we want a greater chance at an incredible discovery.
And in all these sciences, I would assume and hope that everyone supports all of them, because we have been focused a lot on how do you get to the stars? You know, what's the propulsion, what's the ship, all that. But you have to have a target in mind. So all the work we can do on exoplanet discoveries, like we've had talks on seeing if there's intelligent life there in advance before you go, these are all essential steps that are enablers for our drive.
Thank you. I think this next one we've kind of answered. Are we detectable by ETC? And the other one I think we kind of went over. Why should ETC even attempt to contact us? Unless you wanted to talk about those, I'll talk about the last one. I don't think this is actually a SETI question. I had this whole presentation on the Silurian hypothesis, and I'll just premise it by saying there was an advanced intelligent species on Earth. It happened 350 million years ago. It's gone, completely eroded. How would you know? How would you detect it? What evidence would you look for? So the question is, here's this advanced intelligent alien civilization. It's not there anymore. And now it may be that they just died out like 20,000 years ago, or they've been gone for millions of years and natural erosion has taken over. You can answer either of those types of a hypothesis, but how would you actually go about detecting them?
So I think maybe I guess the biggest, well, the highest chance we have of detecting a prior advanced civilization I think would be perhaps in radioactive, in the detection the detection of radioactive isotopes from I guess nuclear technology. I think that gives us, that's pretty much the place that gives us the best chance of searching for a prior advanced civilization.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways we would have known if there was a previous technological civilization, or maybe even advanced. We're leaving a lot of signature in the Earth record right now. Some of y'all might know this. You know, what is the scientific definition of the present for radiocarbon dating? It's about 1950, I believe, because that's when we really started to put a lot of radioactive debris into the atmosphere and the Earth system. That would show up in the past. We have solid fossil records that go back a pretty long ways. So there's multiple chemical traces that would be evident. There would probably be fossil traces. Even with Earth's recycling of its crust, that would be the case. As far as extinct alien civilizations, which might be the majority of the civilizations we could ever find, nothing pops into my mind short of actually getting there and seeing the evidence. But boy, wouldn't that be a great field, an exoarchaeologist? I'd sign up for that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, let's go find out.
Yeah, okay, so a unique isotopic signature that doesn't happen in nature. I would throw out microplastics. Also, if they've explored in their solar system, for example, if the Solarians explored our moon, those artifacts would still be on the moon. Great. That was kind of the end of my questions. Does the panel have any questions that they want to throw out or want to discuss?
I want to hear the audience throw some counter punches, ask us some questions and such. Let's give one mic back.
Which one was a geophysicist? You? Okay. All right. So maybe you can address that. We seem to be constantly hearing about new factors that make life on Earth rare. Sure, you heard of the rare Earth hypothesis that explains the Fermi Paradox by the fact that there's too many coincidences that allow Earth to happen. So two that occurred to me that were revealed recently was one, that the impact that formed the moon, it was that impact itself that delivered the large amounts of water to the Earth. Extremely rare event. And the fact that for other sun-like stars, this one is really surprising. Most sun-like stars seem to have a regular basis of enjoying super flares. These are the strongest, and if they happen, the deadliest. The strongest type of flares that would make the current event look like a firecracker. So what's your opinion on the rare Earth hypothesis?
Okay, some of that falls into my wheelhouse. There might be people in the audience that can answer better than I, but an Earth-like planet is rare. I think that's pretty clear, but where do you draw the line on what rare is? Is it 10%? Is it 1%? Is it a millionth of a percent of planets are Earth-like? And here's the one aspect that I got to earlier, which is that a planet stays habitable long enough for life to evolve. And there again, we're unbounded. We know it took 4.5 billion years for us, but what if it only takes 1 billion on other places? There's a lot of things that go in. You know, is a large moon necessary for stability? Simulations show that without a moon, your axial tilt is a lot more variable, but Will that rule out life? I don't think so, but this is a multidisciplinary kind of area to go into. The water issue, again, you have a lot of things there. You know, you could have a planet that forms farther out in the solar system, comes in, brings water with it. It could be comets, it could be asteroids bringing in. So there's a lot that could go into rare earth. It is rare, but where I would draw the line, I just don't know. Anyone want
As I said, I've done a whole series of these things, and one of them was exclusively on the rare earth hypothesis. So you guys from the Europa report had a question. Did you want to bring that up?
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of those points through the discussion, but I think a question, something I was trying to allude to in my part of the presentation is a planet that is conducive to develop intelligence one that's conducive to long-term survival of a civilization on it? Obviously, we have these large climate shifts that we've experienced in our own recent past, which are maybe fairly unique in Earth history, but they're also set up to respond very sensitively to whatever civilization is doing, which as we're experiencing right now. So maybe the panel's perspective on that.
Well, I'm not sure if this is what you're driving at, but when you were talking earlier, it prompted me thinking, yes, we've had ice ages during the time that Homo sapiens has been around, but we didn't get to one of the snowball Earths. What if we had gotten to a snowball Earth? That probably would have set Earth back to aquatic-only species. So, yeah, I think that's getting back to what you're saying about there's a lot of variables that go into keeping a planet good for a very long time. And don't forget, if you're not familiar with planetary dynamics, sometimes solar systems are like a billiard ball table as far as planets switching orbits, gravitationally slingshotting things out and about. We're discovering a lot more rogue planets, and that's an whole other interesting area of speculation.
Yeah, I think as an outsider, I think it's interesting when people that study life existing under ice and the lakes that you study in Antarctica call them extremophiles. They're not the extremophile. We're the extremophile, right? We have to survive in this, planet that's gone through all these incredible, living under the ice is they're in this stable ecosystem that maybe exists for a billion years. So it's probably just a bias, right? That's our biases coming in. But yeah, it is interesting to think about, if there were life that was in an ice-capped world, would they be interested at all in looking out into the universe? Would they even have a concept of going on the other side of a 10-kilometer thick sheet of ice? Would be quite interesting.
Yeah, I suppose I only wish to comment that I guess adding to what Ken was saying is that that in order for a planet to remain in a habitable zone for a sufficiently long period of time, the entire planetary system has to be stable for that same period of time. And I think N-body simulations in the past few decades have shown that even our own solar system is ultimately unstable, but fortunately I think the instability only kicks in after somewhere on the order of 10 billion years. So I think we're safe for a little while longer.
The interesting aspect of your question to me is that it has two distinct and almost opposite, well, not opposite, two distinct possibilities. The first one is that the time span for an intelligent civilization could be very, very short. In terms of humanity, we're talking about 10,000 years. However, what did those drastic changes in climate do to humanity? They turned us into generalists of a high order. We are very capable of surviving in many different types of climates. So it may have been the grounds for why we are who we are today. Did you have a question?
Yes. So the question really is, why would another civilization even bother with us? Most of the people are stuck in a gravity well. If you want resources, the comets, the asteroids, everything, they're much easier to access than going back down into a gravity well. That other civilization already climbed out of their gravity well, and presumably if they're large enough, they're already spaceborne. Okay, they're not tied to a planet. So why would anybody bother with us?
At the risk of spoiling my talk a bit, if a civilization is so one of the things that I will talk about tomorrow is the possibility that civilizations will choose to exploit relativistic time dilation, and so instead of using that to shorten travel times in the frame of the travelers, you would also use that to shorten or you would also dilate the time of the civilization to avoid temporal disparities. Now, one of the things that I will talk about is the possibility that hostile civilizations might emerge as threats, and these things. And if your civilization is time dilated with a very high time dilation factor, our entire history, the entire history of human civilization will take place in the proverbial blink of an eye relative to a highly time dilated civilization. And so the reason why they might bother with us in that scenario is because if threats emerge, they can emerge on a very short time scale, as viewed by the time-dilated civilizations. That's one reason why they might bother.
Outside of my expertise, but one thing that's often brought up is, it's essentially the same question, but why would someone want to commerce with another civilization? And frequently what you get is the creative side of things, because resources are pretty plentiful. Yeah, there's no reason why anyone would ever need to come down into our gravity well. We probably aren't going to taste good, probably incompatible on the amino acid level. They're unlikely to want to have sex with us, despite what the movies say. So that's probably out. But, and here's where maybe, I'm a little trained in the way I think as a general. I'd want to know if there's a rising alien civilization, could they ever be a threat? If someone moves in next to you in your neighborhood, you'd want to know if they're a child molester or if they have a violent history. Same thing. An interstellar capable civilization is capable of wiping out life on a planet. So, fail to the safe side, fail safe. You're going to want to know what they're capable of, what they're up to. You're going to want to know if maybe you need to take some preemptive action.
Yeah, I have a question. It's more of a comment in search of a comment back, I guess. Last night in my talk about interstellar travel, I talked about how we don't really comprehend as humans the distances involved. And we kind of lump big numbers together as if one big number is the same as a number that's 3 orders of magnitude bigger, right? Are we underestimating deep time here and its effect on this just from our temporal limits of 70 to 80 years of life? Just a comment in search of a comment.
The short answer is yes, and I think that when you start thinking about, when you start thinking about orders of magnitude of differences in the time scales, you start to develop very different perspectives on things, and that's partly what drove the research that I'll be talking about tomorrow.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a good point. If our lifespans were 1,000 years, our perspective on this might be quite a bit different from what it is now. Does life have to have finite lifespans? Could you have an intelligent organism arise that doesn't have an endpoint, that doesn't have to reproduce? I don't know. I'll leave that to any biologist in the issue. But the time factor is also a big deal. So unless there's a breakthrough in physics that we're not aware of, I just ran the numbers a while ago. If there were 1,000 civilizations, technological civilizations in the galaxy, which would be a lot, then you could expect them to be on the order of 3,000 light years away from us. That's still well outside our radio bubble by a huge margin. Would they ever be a factor? Unless, again, there's a breakthrough, would they ever really impact us? Probably not physically, but maybe information-wise. I mean, just knowing there's another civilization would be a big deal. And if you had that same number of civilizations, the chances of one being within 100 light years, 1 in 7,690. So, time is distance, and that's the way I think of it is in distance and how that impacts all of this.
Yeah, no, I agree, Les. It's much more difficult to grapple with deep time than it is interstellar distances. I'm sure a lot of us have done this calculation. If we just take the primitive interstellar technology we have today, okay, we take our best ion drive and slap some kind of nuclear reactor to it, and we take 1,000 years to reach the next star, and then we set up there a civilization that takes 1,000 years to get going, and then we launch the next probe out. So we do the slow road approach. Even then, it only takes, a few million years to colonize the entire galaxy. And our galaxy has been around for billions of years, so there's likely been, if you believe life is ubiquitous, there's been many waves that have passed through our galaxy. And I think you had a slide on this that we skipped, Mark, but you mentioned Jeff Landis's percolation hypothesis, that maybe, there have been networks of interstellar civilizations that we just happen to miss one of the nodes. But yeah, it's time. It's really, really hard to wrap your head around 1 billion years. But 4.3 light years is not that difficult. Even crossing the galaxy is not that difficult. And this is a pet peeve of mine. The one thing that science fiction always gets wrong is it's actually not that hard to get to the next galaxy. Okay? The galaxies are not that far apart. The stars are very, very far apart. But the galaxies are actually quite close together, right? So if you don't know the numbers on this, if you shrink our solar system down to the size of a coin, the next solar system, Alpha Centauri, is a football field away. It's 100 meters away. If you shrink our galaxy down to the size of a coin, the next galaxy is only about 18 inches away. Galaxies are quite close together. So if you have the technology to cross a galaxy, which a certain popular science fiction television series does, then it's actually not that difficult to get to Andromeda, So it's the distances really aren't that far. It's the time. I mean, wrapping your head around 1 billion years is really a struggle.
I've edited, re-edited these slides an incredible number of times, but what you just talked about, this is a good question. Jeff Landis proposed this based on the percolation theory. And what it is that you're so you're modeling civilizations as they're expanding through the universe. And what you're saying is that it's going to take a slower than light speed. You go out and you colonize another place. After 100 years or so, they will colonize. Now, you're not recolonizing things, so there's no space wars involved. The question is, how long will it take to colonize the entire galaxy? And the answer comes back, not that long, a million years or so. And then the question starts becoming, because the model also predicts voids of an abyss. And I remember reading some stuff that we may actually be in an abyss. And the question is, they're out there, and they're expanding. They just haven't gotten to us yet. So the question is, like you said, over the course of 1 million years, our time frame is 10,000 years at most. Okay, so I'm sitting there, I'm at a science fiction convention, and I'm doing the slide, and I'm proposing it, and I'm going, that's you, because he was sitting right next to me. Yeah. And he said, do you want to talk? And he said, Mark, do you want to talk about this? I said, I'm not that arrogant that I'm going to talk about the paper that you wrote. So, yes, it was funny. He's a great guy, by the way.
Yeah, well, I would just postulate that perhaps it's not that they are no longer, or at least these networks have not reached us or they're no longer there. Perhaps they are here. It's just that they're operating on just such a different time scale that we don't recognize it.
If they're colonizing the bulk of the galaxy, then I don't really support that we're in a gap, because, yeah, if you're colonizing most of the galaxy, colonization is expensive. Probes are relatively cheap, and you would at least probe every star you could. So I think it decreases the chances of being bypassed completely. Now, it may be very difficult to tell if there's a probe hanging out or has been through our solar system, but is it likely that we're in a complete information void regarding another civilization? One that's settled most of the galaxy? I'm skeptical of that.
Oh, this is why I love this topic, because there are, these are think pieces, and there's so many interesting approaches to these things. And I am encouraging the audience to ask more questions about this. I prefer as much audience participation as possible, but I'd like to take us back to the rare earth hypothesis again. Okay, so my degree is in biology, so I tend to think this way anyway. But if you start looking at the natural evolution of life on this planet, think about the filters involved in creating complex life. And there's about 3 of them that I'll postulate. And one of them is turning abiotic chemistry into biotic chemistry, non-living chemistry into living chemistry. Now you have primitives, now you have very primitive cells. They evolve into complex cells. There was at a certain point, one of these primitive cells ate another primitive cell, and it didn't digest it, and it turned it into mitochondria. We've never seen this happen. We've also never seen the evolution of complex metabolic pathways. And then at a certain point, life starts exploding, the Cambrian explosion, and all of a sudden there's an oxygen-rich environment, and there's an explosion of complex life forms. So what if one or several of these things never happened?
Yeah, we wouldn't be here.
Sorry, I kind of predisposed an answer to that, didn't I? More questions? Oh, good.
Yeah, I have to ask just a comment follow on that. How much of our existence, if you follow evolutionary theory, is due to accident and history and not just evolutionary pressures? And I'm thinking like the KT impact, which ended the reign of the dinosaurs. That didn't necessarily have to happen, right? Or the Permian extinction, or all these geologic events in history, which are not like the slow march forward that you hear about in evolution textbooks, but are abrupt, radical changes that reset the dice. I can't help but think about that when I think about the history of life on Earth. There's a lot of things that really changed that were not just slow changes, but they were catastrophic changes.
I like that as an opener. I think it does open up a lot of interesting thought experiments. So, to me, convergent evolution is a very powerful force. How many eyes have evolved? I think 8 times or more independently. Useful things have evolved. The fact that most species have sensory clusters, input and output pathways that are roughly similar, a limited number of limbs and such. So, if the KT hadn't happened, and the geologic name has changed on that, I don't remember what the current one is, but, I would say there's at least a reasonable chance that we would be intelligent dinosaur descendants at this point. The evolutionary pressures are still there. The advantages of someone developing some intelligence and being adaptable are still there. Yeah, there's many other ways to survive. You can develop greater speed. You can develop better ability to hide or camouflage or protect yourself. Intelligence is just one of those ways that happens for nature to evolve something that can survive better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a biologist, but when I look at biology, to me, it's all accidents, right? I mean, just look at our own bodies, right? The rather uncomfortable intermingling of our reproductive system and our excretion system, you know, it's all accident. And then evolution just every once in a while hits upon something that works, and then that builds from there. But it's just all a bunch of jumbled accidents combined with nature isn't very kind to accidents that aren't beneficial.
Yeah, well, Ken touched on an interesting point, which perhaps might inform or perhaps re-inform one of the questions that we came across earlier regarding how similar we might expect extraterrestrial civilizations to be to ours, and perhaps this notion of convergent evolution might be generalized to civilizations, and perhaps the civilizations that do reach the stars will end up looking like the civilization we become if we also develop an interstellar civilization.
I'd like to throw one out to the audience to think about. You know, are we the pinnacle of intelligence? It's a crude measure, but brain to body mass ratio, at least for like mammals, seems to be a fairly good indicator. We've got the highest ratio of that, but not by that much. So basically, evolution gave us just enough intelligence to get an advantage and keep it. But what if there had been a more competitive environment that forced us up to a higher level of intelligence to be able to survive like that? So I think that, I just like that question, so I just want to throw that out.
Yeah, hello. So I'm an affiliate with the SETI Institute, and one of the things that this discussion has led me to think about and open up as a topic is what type of augmentation would you recommend for the Drake equation? Because we've touched on a lot of different aspects, like, for example, what you just brought up, marine mammals. Marine mammals are likely extremely intelligent, but they don't have the kind of impetus that we seem to have to expand or, reach out, try to communicate, and wonder about what's going on, elsewhere. So is that something that we could quantify, within the Drake equation, or something else having to do with like the rare earth hypothesis, having to do with perhaps having a large moon is also important for how we were able to evolve. So just as sort of a summation, are there any sort of additional variables you'd advocate for?
Well, just my opinion, but the Drake equation is a nice, useful guide, tool. I mean, it's not rigorous. It's largely unbounded. There have been many papers that will take one or more of those variables and expand them into a lot more things. And that's essentially where it sounds like you're going. Yeah, you could throw in likelihood that a planet has a sizable moon or any number of these things. And for specific areas, depending on what you're working on, that's quite useful. But as a general thing, especially one that, that the population can kind of grasp pretty easily, the Drake equation is, I think, set up fairly well.
If anything, I would advocate for adding a factor that takes into account the different time scales that the civilizations might operate on. And so, for instance, if you have a civilization that's, let's say, either operating at a very low energy or perhaps even time dilated, the frequency at which they would send out signals or perhaps expeditions would be greatly lowered. And so I would advocate for some factor that takes into account these effects.
This is ancillary well, no, go ahead, because mine's ancillary.
I think the thing that's missing in the classic formulation of it that several people have attempted to address is to bring statistics into it and distribution functions to make a statistical or probabilistic Drake equation One of the founders of TVIW, Claudio Macon, made an attempt to do this, to make a statistical version of it. The latest version I've seen is a paper that came out just last few years from Anders Sandberg, who I think was, I don't know if he made it to the European Symposium or not. We were trying to get him to come. He had an interesting paper where he came up with distribution functions for each one of the terms, and when he combined them together, he found that there's a really long tail. So even if you're very optimistic about the prevalence of life, life-forming intelligence, you're optimistic in each one of the estimations of those terms, there's a really long tail, and when you integrate that tail, the answer is it's about 50% that we're still alone in the galaxy right now. There's no other existent civilizations. So I don't know enough statistics to comment on these, but I think that's where there's some fertile ground to go in and do these kind of statistical analysis of it.
You sparked a thought talking about time dilation to follow up on what Orbit Nyack was talking about yesterday. Just think of one of the implications if you could digitize the human brain. He was using it in terms of, well, we'll send them to the planets, but what if that becomes your Starship pilot? And there have been stories that have explored this. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but if you're a digitized brain and you're on a 10,000-year journey, the speed of your Starship may not matter. Why? Because you can dial down your cycle rate to near zero, and it would go by in the blink of an instant. So just a tangential thought there.
Yeah, I've often thought that with the Drake equation, there are some factors that really weren't well represented. And one of them is, what's the impact of plate tectonics on the evolution of life forms? Because evolution, as we understand it, a genetic drift, which is there's a mountain between you and somebody else, and so therefore you genetically start drifting away, or you're acting upon climate or the environment. Well, without plate tectonics, you don't have these ring volcanoes. Also, the continents are weathering, so there's CO2 going in the atmosphere. But you're getting these trace elements like phosphorus and zinc, and these become incredibly important for the development of life, advanced life. Yes.
I was going to make a comment on, I think it was your slide 5, I forget which one, but it was about, is it obvious that an extraterrestrial civilization would want to expand, would want to look out and look for us? And maybe they're in the ocean like dolphins and they don't have fire, so it's hard to build spaceships without fire. But one thing to think about, let's say you roll the dice enough and there's another extraterrestrial intelligence that's within an order of magnitude of our intelligence, an order of magnitude of our mass, an order of magnitude of our lifespan, but they happen to be on a super Earth where the surface gravity is twice that of Earth. You plug a doubled G into the rocket equation, it gets very, very difficult to get off the planet unless you're willing to use nukes in your biosphere. They may just be stuck on their own surface.
Okay, Stephen, you hit one of my pet peeves here. So yes, if Earth was twice as big, it's not impossible to get to orbit. Okay, but the delta V's get large, but we've done double delta V of what you need to get to Earth orbit. So I mean, if you're under 10 kilometers of ice, then yeah, you may never think about going to orbit. But if you're on the surface of a planet, the advantages of going to orbit for remote sensing and weather, I mean, you're going to eventually develop a space program. And my hero, Robert L. Forward, wrote a novel called Dragon's Egg, where he figured out, a civilization living on the surface of a neutron star. Even they figured out how to get to orbit. So we'll get, they'll get there eventually if they're a technologically sophisticated civilization.
Actually, you touched on another question, which I find interesting. And in the Star Trek community, they always say, well, they're all these bumpy-headed aliens. Why would that actually be? And it's, well, wait a minute now. Think about this. Covalent convergent evolution, okay? We have plenty of examples of very intelligent species on this planet. and you brought one up. Dolphins and whales are incredibly intelligent, right? Most of their brain processing is probably used in imaging their environment, but there's nothing much for them to act on. Octopuses are incredibly intelligent, and they have the characteristic of not just being smart, but having digits that can manipulate things. Elephants are also very intelligent. They have one appendage that can manipulate things. Human beings have a number of characteristics that make us succeed. We have binocular vision. We have multiple digits. We can carry massive workloads. Our brain is a general mechanism for thinking. And so maybe these aliens are actually going to be bipedal, something that looks like a hominid. Okay, why not? We don't know. Anyway, it's just a pet peeve of mine. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
We've made the assumption that intelligence is good for survival. Now, we know that the dinosaurs lived and were the dominant life form on this planet for many, many, many millions of years. Intelligence has been around for some tens of thousands in our current form. It seems to me that dinosaurs showed that non-intelligence is a much better criterion for survival than intelligence. Therefore, why do we keep saying that we should be looking for intelligence when intelligence might very well be counter to survival?
I guess I would comment that I guess I would maybe add that perhaps it seems to me that intelligence is necessary to overcome situations in which the environment in which the organism lives becomes, I guess, becomes, I guess, toxic or unsurvivable, let's say, but this is a very good question. Is there an alternative to intelligence that can allow an organism to survive when the environment changes beyond, I guess, what it's able normally to survive?
Yeah, it's almost a circular issue here. I mean, the only kind of civilization we're going to be able to interact with at any kind of distance is going to be another intelligent civilization. So even if it's a rare thing, the prize of discovering another civilization is so many orders of magnitude greater than the prize of finding just life that, you know, that's still perfectly reasonable to drive towards, I think.
Yeah, this has already been partially addressed, I think, but I read an article years ago that suggested that life may be most abundant on these ice-covered moons like Europa. And if that turned out to be the case, then the chances of intelligent life arising on a moon like that might be higher. So, but the thing is, it's like, our species, even though we could see the night sky, it took us a long, long time to figure out what we were actually seeing. But if an intelligent species developed under the ice of Europa or a similar moon, it's like it could take them, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions of years to figure out that there's even anything on the other side of the ice. So, any thoughts on that?
I think you're quite right. I mean, you could have the equivalent of dolphins there right now, but you're facing a lot of hurdles to becoming technological. It was already mentioned, you know, you can't combust anything, and we haven't figured out a way to get to technology short of that, really. I mean, yeah, you could have tools like stones, and octopuses use rocks as tools. They throw them occasionally at things and creatures they don't like. So you've got that issue, and you got the issue of, would you even conceive of a world outside your spherical ice shell? No, I think you're right on there.
To answer your question, I don't want to get into a debate on creationism versus not, but evolution doesn't have a point. It's a mechanism for reacting to the environment and condition around you. So is intelligence the end goal of evolution? You know, it was in our case, but yes, insects are incredibly prolific and they encompass most of the animal life on the planet, you know. So no, intelligence is not, it's not necessarily, life does not necessarily end with an intelligent species.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And evolution is not directional, but there's other aspects to this. You know, are we the most successful life form on Earth? No, not by mass, not by numbers. So, you know, evolution gives us some unique niches and things we can do with intelligence, but it doesn't even make us the dominant life form here. The most influential, the most powerful, potentially, yes. It goes back to, you know, could another intelligent species arise? Probably not while we're here, because we'll stomp it out before it could be. But there's other ways to look at it. You know, are we just, does corn use us as a proliferator? What about our cat overlords? You know, we are trained to pick up their poop. Who's serving who there?
So I guess it stimulated a couple of thoughts. I guess I'll just throw these out there. If you imagine a civilization, or let's say an organism that can go into space and that can propagate to many stellar systems, so the question is, of course, whether intelligence is a requirement for that. So that's one thought, and of course it has to, and of course if you say that it is, then you would expect that if you found some organism that has propagated to all these stellar systems, then you would then it would maybe naturally select out the ones that are intelligent. But of course, you know, this is based on the assumption that you need an intelligence to do that, and I suppose you can imagine some ways in which an organism can spread to many stellar systems without having to without needing intelligence. So anyway, just a couple of thoughts.
Actually, I was thinking about space. Yeah, I was speaking about that as well. Any other questions from the audience? Oh, okay. Yeah, yes. Okay, it's 3:45. So thank you, everybody. We appreciate your questions, and I hope you enjoyed this session. Thanks a lot. And thank you, Les, and the committee for choosing this presentation.